Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name's Michelle Whitty. I'm here with John Kiriakou.
We've been telling our listeners about the looming debt ceiling deadline. And guess what? We've hit it.
Woohoo! Oh, wait, no, not woohoo, right?
No, not woohoo.
Bummer.
It was supposed to happen at midnight tonight. It happened about an hour and a half ago. Technically, the U.S. will not be able to borrow money without an increase in its credit limit. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that she can institute what she called emergency measures that will hold off a federal default until June. I mentioned yesterday that those emergency measures include not paying interest on our pre-1917 debt.
I'd like those emergency measures. I'd like to not pay interest on my debt. Can I do that?
Crazy. She said she could hold this off until June, but that's a drop dead date. Here's what CNN had to say about it this morning. Listen to this wonderful quote. If the standoff lasts until a drop dead date in the summer, it could trigger a financial and stock market cataclysm and crash the retirement savings of millions of Americans. The government might also not have enough cash to pay Social Security payments, federal workers, or veterans benefits, unquote. House Republicans want significant spending cuts for their votes to raise the debt ceiling. The White House says it will not negotiate. But is this actually just a paper exercise? Why do we have a debt limit when no other country has this same kind of crisis? New data showed yesterday that retail sales fell 1.1%, with higher interest rates and inflation hurting the sales of vehicles, gas, and furniture. And the president of the St. Louis Fed said yesterday that he expected the benchmark rate to go as high as 5.5% by the end of this year, significantly higher than the market-based expectation of 4.9%. We're going to talk about this with Steve Grumbine. Steve is the founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and he's the host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory. Great to have you back, Steve. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure. We want to start with this debt ceiling situation. I like to think that I'm a relatively intelligent person, right? But for the life of me, Steve, I have never understood why we have a debt ceiling and why we have to fight over this every few years. Can you explain this to me? When did this begin? And why does it always end up as such a crisis?
So you got to go back to the gold standard era, okay? The idea of, quote unquote, printing money against the gold holdings of the United States. And they had a certain amount of limit that they wanted to put on how much debt you could print against that gold. Well, this is an old, antiquated idea that was there intended to prevent, quote unquote, devaluing the dollar and all these other things, right? But we're not on a commodity money, and we haven't been for a very, 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 very long time. So the whole construct of the debt ceiling goes back to World War I, World War II, stuff like this, okay? Reality is that the United States government doesn't borrow money, okay? It doesn't borrow money ever.
Right.
Never, ever. In fact, Jamie Galbraith in The Nation wrote a great piece. I just want to read this one paragraph of his article today, and please check it out. It's in The Nation. And the statement goes like this: the United States does not borrow in order to have funds to pay its obligations. It pays its obligations by check or electronic transfers specified by law. In other words, it creates the money when it spends it. It then issues bonds after it's already spent. It issues bonds so investors across the globe can save a safe U.S. dollar-denominated asset. The Treasury bond that pays interest as cash and bank deposits do not. Cash and bank deposits are not debt subject to the limit under the law. Anyway, the bottom line is that what they're saying is when we go and we use money via the Federal Reserve, in other words, we use our fiat system, okay, we create subsequent reserves in the system. This is like an interbanking money that never leaves the banking system. And as a result of that, the law, and there's no functional requirement for this whatsoever, okay? But the law states that we must sell an offsetting bond to facilitate deficit spending. And so basically what they're doing is they're ensuring that rich people always make out whenever the government expands the money pool. And so this whole thing, it actually helps fund, bonds help fund pension plans. Mm-hmm. But when countries like China do business with the United States, China only has a need for so many U.S. dollars. Most of the time they would take the money that they make here in the U.S., they would either trade that currency in a currency that they would want to save in. Maybe they save in U.S. dollars. And if they decide to save their sales in U.S. dollars, they may choose to buy a treasury bond with that money.
Okay.
And those bonds would be a way for them to save their U.S. dollar holdings and earn a nominal interest rate. Well, we literally don't need to sell bonds at all. It's another anachronism from the gold standard. However, safe investments are a nice thing. Bonds never, ever go broke. Mm-hmm. The government always pays its debts. By law, it's supposed to pay its debts. In fact, constitutionally, Congress has a responsibility to pay its debts. And Janet Yellen knows that. And so this is all part of a game that they use every so often to exact the price from whoever is on the other side of the aisle. Okay? When the Democrats are out of power or in power, they'll do the same thing. No different, just different, right? Republicans and libertarians fetishize cutting federal budgets because they're murderers, quite frankly. They have an appetite for death and destruction of the poor and those who are most vulnerable. So they want to make sure that they make sure those ne'er-do-goods that are unemployed, so that they hurt and suffer. Mm-hmm. The other side, of course, sits there and pretends like they want to do good by the poor and stuff like that, while simultaneously signing on to the very austerity-based politics of the Republicans and the Libertarians. So that's, in the end, it's a big ruse. It's a big show. And at the end of the day, these debts are already things that we've already approved. Congress has already authorized the spending for. So we don't just spend money. We've already written bills that have already promised money out the door. So each of these bills is already money that we've agreed to pay. So we create our own currency. So there's literally no reason not to pay these bills whatsoever. We don't borrow money, so it doesn't really make a bit of difference whether or not we have an A+ credit rating or anything else, because we are our own. We create our own money. We don't borrow it from anyone.
I have to say that this was my thought all along. This just always seems, every time it rears its ugly head, it seems like a fake crisis, that it's not an economic crisis. It's a manufactured political crisis.
Yeah.
So tell me then, why do you think every time this happens, and it's happened like 6 times in the last 20 years, why is it always the Republicans who allow themselves to take it on the chin, and it ends up hurting them politically? Why do they insist on playing this game with Democrats?
Well, see, you got to realize it's a fundamental belief system, right?
Good point.
Are ignorant. They're completely ignorant of federal finance to begin with. They think we borrow money from China.
What, are you saying you don't have confidence in Marjorie Taylor Greene and George Santos?
You could say that, yes. But these knuckleheads really believe that every time the government spends, because Milton Friedman said inflation is always a monetary phenomenon, it's always caused by government spending. So this is their ideological belief system, this libertarian lie from the Chicago school has carried them forward. And they believe this literally to their core. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that you got to realize is that this is the low-key racism, where they know that minorities and others benefit from welfare spending and stuff. So this is their way of getting one more little shot at the poor. And that's another ideological stronghold, because you're only poor if you do bad things, right? If you just did the right things, you wouldn't be poor.
That's right.
Rich, right?
That is right.
This theological debate, and it's theological because it's a religion, okay? These guys are religious zealots when it comes to austerity politics. And in the end, the Republicans always want to get rid of the federal government doing things and put it in the hands of private business, which is now, ever since Bill Clinton, a stronghold of the Democrats as well. And so they're kind of fighting over common ground. The difference is that while the Democrats took over the old Reagan platform, Republicans and libertarians have gone the way of, Ayn Rand. They've gone even further, okay? And so they're not even hiding in it anymore.
Yeah.
This is the problem. This is the ratchet effect in full bloom. As the Democrats cart right, the Republicans tack further right. And what we're watching right now is a clown show. Let me tell you a funny thing. So there's a policy proposal that's being touted about called Mint the Coin.
Okay.
And Mint the Coin is a really important thing because you realize that when you spend money through the Federal Reserve, you have to pay interest on reserves. It's intended that way to prevent money from just pooling up inside the system. They want to make you move that money. So they put interest on those reserves to keep money flowing. It's kind of like a tax within the banking system of sorts. And so rather than do that, these things start building up additional quote-unquote debt because the dollar is the government's debt.
Mm-hmm.
The dollar is the government saying we will accept this in payment of $1 in tax. So in that sense, it's the government's liability. It's our asset when it's in our pocket. So the government's debt is our asset. And so the more you understand this, the more you realize how crazy it is. So what they did was back in the day of the greenbacks, Lincoln, there's a rule that you can only do something like 300 million in greenbacks.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea, though, is that the coins are different. And so there's no limit on coins. And so the idea of minting $1 trillion coin from the Treasury into depositing at the Fed, that right there would literally kill the entire debt ceiling conversation forever. And it's a gimmick because it doesn't have to be done, but it's there and it's legal and it's real and it could happen.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it sounds so crazy that they just might do it, right? But that right there we've been fighting for that for a long time, not because it's a good policy, but because the debt limit is such a clown car show that it would be fun to fight it with a clown car response, a legal one that works. And so the idea of minting $1 trillion coin, we had joked around about making this coin like 16 feet and rolling it down Manhattan. We talked about making it like the size of a penny and literally, dropping it onto a little plate, like a service plate, and serving it up at the Fed. I mean, there's so many jokes about this, but in reality, that right there is a legitimate solution to shutting this conversation down forever. Why they won't do it, let's think about that. Both sides use this as a weapon to extract some form of, pound of flesh from the other. And that's why they won't do it. It's why Biden wouldn't do anything with the filibuster. It's why he wouldn't stack the court. It's why he wouldn't do any of the things he could have done to be successful, because he doesn't want to be successful. He wants there to be a parliamentarian at every corner to prevent them from doing anything, a rotating villain. They want that. They need that. And this is perfect foil, so they won't do anything to stop it.
Yeah, they love the status quo. Hey, CNN ran a very interesting story last night about corruption in the Biden family. This comes on the heels of lots of chatter around Washington among some big names, including people like Joe Rogan, Joe Scarborough, that the Democrats may be willing to walk away from Joe Biden in advance of the 2024 presidential election. Do you think that there's anything to this? I personally don't believe that Joe Biden is a lock to run for re-election. This classified document scandal is hurting him, and the House will soon begin a series of investigations on him, on his administration, people like Secretary Mayorkas, on Hunter Biden. Do you think Joe Biden is going to run for re-election?
You know what? I don't know. I mean, the man, I don't think should have ran this last time. I don't think should have ever run for president, quite frankly. You can tell his mental faculties are not up to snuff. But number two, I mean, clearly this is ugly. And the next however many years, 2 years, would be nothing but a absolute freak show of, once again, the blue dress and the stain, and cigars and all that. This is going to be Monica Lewinsky 2.0.
Right.
I hope that this miraculous collision of insanity happens just so I can break out my popcorn. But in reality, I honestly think that the Democrats will find a way to rally because there's no one in the wings.
No.
Who is in the wings of the Democratic Party? They've neutered Bernie Sanders,
Yep.
the only person that was even marginally acceptable.
Yep.
They've got Pete Buttigieg, who...
fallen flat on his face.
Oh, awful, right? Kamala Harris?
Forget it.
Exactly. And so you start going down. What are you going to do? Ro Khanna, Klobuchar, Hillary? Hey, Hillary to the rescue again.
Boy.
I mean,
God
so
forbid.
in the end, I can't imagine the Democrats rolling the dice with anyone else. There are no young bucks coming up. AOC is totally rejected by the left now, and she may be starting to become Hillary 2.0. I hate to say this, but I think this is a spectator sport. I think that this is going to be, to quote, Mr. Gerard Butler from Law Abiding Citizen, it's going to be biblical. This is this is going to be a real honest to God treat because there's nothing he can do to stop the Republicans from doing what they're about to do.
Yeah.
And even if it all comes out as a giant nothing burger, the stain from this and the pure fatigue of Biden is going to be overpowering. So even if they're going to run Biden, I think the veneer of a real election will not be able to be hidden from the people's disgust with what he's putting out there. And as bad as DeSantis is on real policy, this is a guy who is devilishly capable, I'm afraid. And,
we've been.
I think we're.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've been talking all week about these issues, and we've been talking a lot this week about the World Economic Forum meetings in Davos, Switzerland. Today's Wall Street Journal says that there's been a lot of hand-wringing over the global economy. No surprise. The European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, am I saying her name correctly?
I think so.
Von der Leyen. She blamed China for many of Europe's problems. We had a good laugh about this in our staff meeting this morning. Mm-hmm. She said that China has encouraged energy-intensive companies to relocate part or all of their production to China. Like, this is revelatory for her. She just realized this. This, coupled with the war in Ukraine and conflict with the U.S. over electric car subsidies, has hurt the global economy. What do you think about this? Von der Leyen said that it's been a dominant topic of conversation at Davos all week.
Yeah, let's think about what Davos and the World Economic Forum is all about. This is the upper crust of the world coming together to determine how they want their oligarchy to look like. And this particular session, as we're watching the world kind of split in two, United States leading the charge and balkanizing it really with its demonization of China and Russia, it is creating this kind of fracture. People think that somehow or another the dollar is going to go out of style and so forth, and these are the big things they focus on. Reality is that it doesn't really matter. The U.S. is intentionally architecting this because this is how they're going to reestablish their own manufacturing base since they allowed it to slip away.
Yes.
The high cost of cheap imports is that you lose your ability to take care of yourself. And strategically speaking, we saw the results of that during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So this is largely a reaction to the pandemic. And the only way to do that is to have a demon. And if you go back to two State of the Unions, Biden was already on the first one complaining about China, putting them up there as the bad guys. Mm-hmm. And he followed that up with his second State of the Union address, demonizing them and Russia as well. And so this has been a long time coming. The U.S. had allowed itself to become a net importer to the point where strategic things like chip manufacturing and all these other silicon things that you need for the high-tech industries we thrive on, they were being produced elsewhere. I mean, I think the iPhone is made in something like 37 countries, okay? That's a very delicate supply chain right there. And so as you start thinking about the United States licking its wounds, bringing some manufacturing back, thinking about how it's going to function in this new multipolar world that it, by its own shortcomings, has created, okay? Russia didn't want to be excommunicated. China doesn't want to not do business with us. This is entirely U.S.-driven. And so Davos is there trying to figure out how to make this all happen. And so largely you've got the elites of the elites. And Davos is, in my opinion, the World Economic Forum is largely the not behind the scenes, not conspiratorial, right there in your face, rulers of the world telling you what they're trying to do. And lo and behold, they have to demonize somebody to bring back the power back to the United States. And this is the way they're going to do it. So a lot of this is hand-wringing, right, for effect, so that there's air cover for this Cold War they're creating. If you boil away the Cold War and you just think about what's happening, the fact is the U.S. didn't do its job taking care of its own infrastructure.
Well, that's the bottom line.
Et cetera.
Yeah, that's really the bottom line right there. We transition to this, service economy, tech economy, and that sort of leads to my next question. Yesterday, we heard about huge layoffs in the tech industry. Microsoft announced that it would lay off 5% of its total workforce. That's 10,000 people beginning today. Another 2,300 people were laid off from Amazon yesterday. Bloomberg said today, I love this quote, a lot of tech CEOs got out ahead of their skis when it came to expanding in 2022. But then Big Four accounting firm Ernst & Young said that it wanted to hire, get this, 220,000 people by the middle of the year. Now, I used to work at Deloitte & Touche, which was bigger than Ernst & Young, and we only had 45,000 people. So is this really a recession, or is it some kind of an economic realignment that we're seeing?
Thank you. So think about this, right? When we say that we're going to raise taxes, I'm going to give you an analogy here to make the case. When I tell you we're going to raise taxes we know do not finance or fund federal spending. But what they do is create fiscal space for additional spending to make it so that it would offset and not be inflationary by creating additional demand that there isn't production to support. The same thing happens when it comes to labor. When you have people that are filling up these jobs, and lo and behold, you want to bring manufacturing back, and you want to bring back all this other industry, and you've got everybody tied up in these tech jobs, you've got everybody tied up in the finance sector, or you've got everybody tied up somewhere else, they create layoffs, not only to create precarity, but also to free up real resources, labor resources, to fill up these new jobs that will be coming in. And some of these are going to be high-end, high-tech jobs in terms of green energy, in terms of manufacturing and so forth. So I fully expect that, number one, this is part of the quote-unquote inflation attack that came from raising interest rates and doing all the other stuff. This is the next step in that process, is to lay people off. If you remember when I talked last time, I talked about a trinity of austerity.
Yes.
One is monetary austerity by raising interest rates. Two is fiscal austerity by eliminating federal spending. And three is firing people, laying people off, creating that precarity that is necessary to keep capitalism floating. And so this is what is being experienced. You've already experienced the interest rate hikes. You've already experienced the federal government turning off the spigot for regular people. But guess what? They were spending big money on the interest rate hikes by raising interest. That was new money being spent to the richest people. And they were that way. The economy wasn't taking. So there is no real recession going on. It's a recession in reality for you and I down here at the bottom. But it's not a recession in terms of paper, that GDP, all that good stuff. That money is still going to the upper crust. And they're still getting richer and richer and richer. So is this a realignment? I think this is a number of things. I think, number one, it's a playoff of the inflation game that they played. And I think it's also about realigning to become more of a production-oriented economy, to offset the lack of manufacturing. There needs to be good, well-trained people. The way to do that is to dislodge them and make them, need jobs. And now all of a sudden when those jobs come, there will be those trained people to fill them. Same thing if we passed a national health care bill that suddenly made health care a right. You would have to find a way to fill the staffing for all those doctors, phlebotomists, anesthesiologists, whatever. And so it's the same thing here. And they won't say that because nobody wants to hear they're engineering the economy by layoffs to prepare a pool of labor ready to go into these new industries. But that's exactly what I believe is happening.
Steve Grumbine, thanks for joining us. Steve is the founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory.